Good evening, everyone. You can go ahead and create a little mood lighting for us if you don't mind. It feels very bright. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Excellent. Welcome back, students, for your spring semester. I'm Toni Griffin, Professor of Practice in Urban Planning in the Department of Urban Planning and Design, and founder and director of the Just City Lab and Urban American City. Welcome to the 6th volume of Mayors Imagining the Just City. And we're delighted to have lobes and students and faculty and the community around us in the room. Let me first invite the audience to silently read Gannett Cottigan's Land Acknowledgement, first read by Gary Hildebrand in the opening to the lecture, The Ground is All Memoranda, in April 2024. Thank you. Next, a quick reminder that we have live captioning available tonight for a virtual and in-person audience. Those joining virtually can enable captions by clicking the closed captioning icon at the bottom of the live stream window. And for our in-person audience, live captioning is also available through the QR code currently on the screen. Great. And if you're having any difficulties, Matt is in the AV booth and can provide you with any assistance that you need. Tonight's event is part of the GSD's Spring Public Program Series, a series of lectures, conferences, and discussions that are free and open to the public. I'd like to briefly mention the next 2 events that are coming up at the GSD, starting with even tomorrow night. Join us for the opening of the exhibition, Designers of Mountain and Water, the exhibition that is now on display in the Drucker Design Gallery that you just walked through to get into Piper, featuring a lecture by philanthropist and social entrepreneur Marissa Charaverno. The event continues also on Friday, featuring conversations with leading landscape architects and scholars from East and Southeast Asia, who will discuss the history and future of sustainable design. For more information on this and other events, please visit the GSD's website. Now, before we get into the entirety of our program, I would like to introduce very important partners to us at the Just City Lab and the Just City Mayoral Fellowship. I'd first like to introduce our partner, Jorrit Jong, who is the director of the Bloomberg Center for Cities. We're very happy to have him in the building tonight. Jorrit, you want to come on up and give him a warm welcome to the GSD?
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jorrit Jong. I'm the faculty director of the Bloomberg Center for Cities here at Harvard. Our mission is to build bridges, not literal bridges, but bridges nonetheless between different disciplines, different schools here at Harvard in service of cities, in service of the communities that city leaders support. And I am so excited today to be here to welcome new mayors, mayors that we've worked with in the past, mayors that we hopefully will work with in the future. And I'm so glad to have an opportunity to thank my colleague, Professor Toni Griffin, for the extraordinary leadership, both intellectually and in the world, that she has demonstrated in conceiving this program, which is so important for so many reasons. First of all, it's practical. You get actual value out of this program for your city, for the built environment. But it's also profoundly important to think about the role that planning and design play in upholding the values of democracy, the rule of law, and justice, and to combine the very practical work of shaping your city and creating a lived environment that supports all of your residents with the broader values of what city leadership looks like is just a testament to the value of this program. This is the 6th year that we're running this program, and the Bloomberg Center for Cities is so proud to support it and to partner with you. And my other message is for faculty and students here. Those of you who are doing research at the university, we are very happy to support work that is immediately responsive to the actual challenges that city leaders face. And if you get inspired by what you hear today or over the next couple of days and want to do more work with cities, for cities, maybe even in cities, come talk to us because we have resources to support that work. And if you are a student and if you wonder where you should go to serve communities, then my answer is, of course, not a surprise, go to cities. If you want to work for government and you wonder, at what level should I start my career? My answer is, you should work for cities. You should contact these mayors and say, how can I get in on this? Because city governments are the world's frontline problem solvers. There is no place where you're closer to problems that you can actually wrap your hands and head around. And there's no place where you're closer to opportunity, to community, and to innovation. So everything that this program represents is opportunity, possibility. And I hope that if you are inspired by what you hear today, you'll knock on our door, because we place students in city halls all over the country and around the world, so that people during the program here at Harvard can get experience working in local government, and hopefully you'll be one of those city leaders that will join the 7th and 8th and 9th and 10th and 100th cohort of the Just Cities Lab. So again, thank you so much, Toni, for having us here, and best of luck to all of you, and have a great evening.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jorrit. Usually I never have to lower the mic. I always have to raise it. And I just want to kind of just follow up on two things just related to that. We're so excited to be in partnership with the Bloomberg Center for Cities. A number of us here in the room, Maurice Cox is here, are faculty affiliates of the Bloomberg Center. So you'll be hearing more about different partnerships that the school has with the Bloomberg City of Centers as those unfold. But we're also happy to announce, in addition to Jorrit's program that places students with cities, the Just City Mayoral Fellowship will also be able to offer that opportunity for the first time this year, that we will be opening up an application process coming soon, later this spring, to have an invitation to work with this year's cohort of mayors. So stay tuned for that as well. With that, I'd like to introduce my partner in crime and change, Trinity Simons, who's the Executive Director of the Mayor's Institute on City Design. With them and the U.S. Conference of Mayors, we've been able to bring this program to GSD over the last 6 years. So Trinity.
Thank you, Toni. I, on the other hand, always have to lower a mic when I get up to speak. But I'm bringing you greetings tonight on behalf of the United States Conference of Mayors, which is the official nonpartisan organization for cities over about 30,000, which is about 1,400 cities. The Conference of Mayors is the leading voice for cities in our nation's capital, but we are delighted to be continuing this for the 6th year with even more support than we had before. And I'm gonna echo Jorrit's comments for the students who are in the room of why mayors and why city government. And yes, these mayors who are here, but also our mayors with the Conference of Mayors. this is a time when it is really easy to be discouraged by what we see in government, but our mayors are the ones who are still getting things done and who are still being creative in problem solving and keeping their heads down and doing the work. In addition to my Conference of Mayors hat, I also run a program called the Mayors Institute on City Design, which is a kind of hybrid technical assistance leadership development program for mayors. We're celebrating our 40th year this year. I've worked with over 1,200 mayors. One of the many outcomes of that program is that mayors start to see themselves as natural allies to the design community. Mayors and designers are problem solvers. They are natural conveners. They balance competing interests, and they are skilled in dissecting what the actual challenges are that you're trying to face, never taking the problem that is on the surface as the given problem. But I can't join you from DC, from a national organization, without talking a little politics too. And we were talking about this a fair amount today, that yes, mayors are keeping their heads down and doing the work, but they're also being called to lead right now in a way that they've never been called on before. And we joke in mayor world that there's no Democrat or Republican way to fill a pothole. But last week at the Conference of Mayors meeting in DC, we were joined by Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, who was reflecting rather passionately on the reason that people run for mayor in the first place. And it can be because they're interested in building affordable housing or public safety or addressing climate. But what we're seeing right now is that there's no Democrat or Republican way to lead at the local level, that there's only integrity. And so for our students here, if you're looking for some inspiration in local politics or in politics at all, you're going to find it in mayors at the local level. Mayor Frey ended his remarks with us saying it's our cities, it's our mayors that are going to hold this democracy together. And I think you're going to get a little taste of that in our remarks tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We intentionally called this a fellowship because being a cohort is probably also important right now, to be able to come together in fellowship and I think encourage to do the work that you're doing right now. And so with that, and on behalf of my partners, I'm really excited to introduce the audience to the 2026 cohort of the Just City Mayoral Fellows. And if I might ask you to stand really quickly so that we can put faces on these names. We have Mayor Katrina Thompson from Broadview, Illinois. We have Mayor Barbara Buffalo from Columbia. We have Leonardo Williams, the mayor of Durham, North Carolina. We have Mayor Mindy O'Neill from Fairbanks, Alaska. We have Mayor Travis Stovall from Gresham, Oregon, outside of Portland. And Mayor Sangeetha Rayapati from Moline, Illinois. Courage and cohort and collective action. Did I miss someone? Oh my God. Mayor Dominique Pangallo from Salem, Massachusetts, our neighbor, and Mayor Carolyn Torosis from Santa Monica, California. I'm sorry. This is what happens when you don't do a page break in the right place. But really delighted to have them here. We had a whole day of our initial conversation. They are about to embark on 10 weeks of coursework with us. Yes, Mayor Pangallo. To learn how to be the chief urban designers of their city through the lens of designing for greater justice. So tonight's program, we start with Mayors Imagining a Just City, where we like to expose the work that the mayors are doing to a more public audience. And this begins in a time of deep and serious change, disruption, and uncertainty, with shifting economic and federal funding dynamics, polarized public discourse, and increasing pressing responsibilities being put on local officials, mayors in particular, making your work as mayors even more complex than ever, but also your personal commitment to service even more admirable. This moment of disruption is just one of many, both behind us and in front of us, on Dr. King's long arc of justice, where the near future may feel incredibly uncertain and murky, but our long-term goals for the beloved community and our values must remain steadfast. Tonight, I'm thrilled to hear from and be in conversation with three gentlemen who have devoted their careers to thinking and doing, and rethinking and redoing the work of creating more just cities. As a kickoff to this year's fellowship theme, Repairing Place, Restoring Identity, our panelists will share a perspective and example on how to maintain a vision of equity, address injustice, advance the design and development of neighborhood revitalization and civic infrastructures while responding to the shrinking of human and capital resources while also maintaining dignity, belonging, and trust. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists and get the real stars of our show on the stage. Joining us from long distance, and you will see his image, maybe not quite yet, is Mayor Aftab Pureval, who unfortunately was preparing to join us in person, but last-minute plans did not allow that to happen. But Mayor Pureval is the 70th mayor of the city of Cincinnati. He was raised in the Southwest Ohio, the son of first-generation Americans. He's making history as Cincinnati's first Asian-American mayor. He has made equitable economic growth a top priority of his administration, as well as a comprehensive reform and improvement of public safety, affordable housing, and environmental action. I'm going to do really short bios. Xavier de Souza Briggs, a longtime friend and scholar. I'm so happy to finally get him in the building. Our schedules aligned. He's a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, an award-winning researcher and educator. He is also an experienced leader in philanthropy and government. His recent research has focused on revitalizing regional economies by investing in advanced industries, good jobs, climate action, and tangible ways to advance effectiveness and fairness in the way government works. And finally, probably no stranger to those of us at the GSD is Anthony Flint, Senior Fellow at the Lincoln Institute on Land Policy, host of the Land Matters podcast, contributing editor to Landlines magazine, and a correspondent for Bloomberg City Lab and the Boston Globe. He is also author, and we're going to talk about this a little bit, of Mayor's Desk, 20 Conversations with Local Leaders Solving Global Problems. It's going to be really interesting to have Anthony on the table because he did that work when we were deep into COVID, in the last crisis of working and thinking about how we're moving our way through both the health pandemic and George Floyd. So here we are again in a moment of time. So one lesson to students, this will not be the last crisis that you will confront, but all of us are here to attest that you will survive them, live through them, and make the world better. So without further ado, let me invite Xav Briggs to the floor. Please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you, everybody, very much. Thank you, Toni. I think I'm going to pour some water while I have a moment here. It's a thrill and a privilege to be here with you for many reasons. First, I'm always delighted to be cast in a Toni Griffin production. And this is a very, very special one. What Toni and her partners have created with mayors from all over the country, whose beautiful faces were just on that screen a moment ago, is really, really special. And I hope I can contribute a little something to it tonight. I also want to congratulate the new cohort of mayors. And even more than that, I want to thank you for your service. I want to thank you for being in public life right now, knowing how precious that is. I subtitled this talk, and I've thought about it, as creating more just cities in a perfect storm of converging challenges, of multiple challenges. Toni knows I'm a son of the Caribbean. I know a thing or two about big storms. I've lived through some really awful ones. Storms can arrive in all kinds of ways and with all kinds of consequences. They can affect our homes and loved ones. They can affect our financial well-being. But a storm can also arrive as an assault on our values, our most deeply held values. And so I'm very privileged to be together with you and to think about this, about creating more just cities, and can't even start to do that without sending strength to the Minneapolis community tonight and to communities all across the country who are fighting for human dignity, the rule of law, and basic human rights. And I say that without an ounce of partisanship or partisan intent, but it's deeply, deeply felt. I want to tackle with you, I want to address this challenge of creating more just cities, and at such a time, by posing a question. How do we not waste a crisis? It's been my observation, unfortunately, that in America, we're actually pretty good at wasting crises. History shows that they're easy to waste. A sense of urgency builds. There can be, at times, in the most frustrating moments, a kind of ritual hand-wringing and outrage, and then attention moves on. I used to ask my students to go to Google Ngram, that thing that checks how often a word gets used at different times. And if you Ngram, if you type in the words American Dream, it begins in the 1930s. There's a writer who coins the idea, and then it gets picked up in our politics and our popular culture, and it becomes a deeply, deeply resonant touchstone in American public life. Try urban crisis. It looks like a blip on a heart monitor. It's in the late 1960s, of course, a time of tremendous civil unrest in well over 100 communities, across the country, and then it's gone. And the country's attention just moved on and moved back, in so many ways. So how do we not waste a crisis? How do we determine not to do that? Let me offer a few thoughts on doing that. We need to start with what are some of the challenges? They're all around us, and everyone in elected life is particularly conscious of these. One is the profound concern about the cost of living. And it really is the relationship, right, between what things cost and your income and what you're able to bring in. It's not just the prices. While the news media loves to cover the price of milk or people's strong views about gas prices at any given moment, that's a bouncing ball, and that's a common news story. But when you dig underneath, and that's the point of this headline on the right side of your screen, when you look a little deeper, the deepest concerns about affordability, first of all, it's voters under the age of 45, primarily, not only, but primarily. And it's not the price of milk or the price of gas. It's, the answers. It's housing, it's childcare, it's healthcare. It's the big, big structural things in our lives that either enable us to lead a life of some basic dignity or not, or deny that. And this led us to do some things at Brookings. We've been putting out an index every year of how regions around the country are doing. Our frame for it, and we're pretty passionate about this and committed to it, our frame for it has been inclusive growth. Not just is the pie changing in regions across the country, in local economies now, but who's getting a slice of that pie, right? We have seen a lot of growth in the country. The problem is we have not done inclusive growth very well, especially over the last 30 or 40 years. We see many, many symptoms of that. But we realized that we still weren't doing enough. This is still an incomplete picture. The harder and in many ways more powerful question to ask as you monitor America, especially local America, local communities, the more powerful question we submit to you is, who's managing to grow while remaining affordable? So simple to say, it's proven very, very challenging to actually accomplish, and I want to show you something that we found. My colleagues took a look at over 200 regional economies over the last decade. I'm going to interpret that piece of modern art for you on the right side of your screen now. The vertical axis, think of it as an affordability index, and the horizontal axis is growth. So more to the right is good in terms of economic vitality, but as you go up, you become less affordable. So any statistical analyst will tell you, right from the first day of class on how to work with data, that's an extremely powerful relationship. You draw a diagonal line right up through that thing, and it looks like something close to an iron law. If you want economic vitality in America, sorry, you're going to have to become an unaffordable region, a region where the cost of living is more and more out of reach, especially for working families. It's not actually true. This is a tendency. It is not predetermined. And we're seeing parts of the answer on the ground in communities across the country. My colleagues found that in only 10 of the 200 economies they looked at over the last decade, did a community manage substantial growth without seeing the cost of living change in a significant way or become unaffordable, let's put it that way. Only 10 out of 200. And you know the one thing they had in common? They all managed to expand their housing supply. So let's think land, let's think what we do with land, let's think the rules, the capital, all of it, because all of it matters. They managed to expand housing at a rate faster than their population growth. It's kind of a fundamental principle if we want to achieve this. I'm delighted to see communities, by the way, that are changing dramatically because of manufacturing or other things, deciding, and I've been like a broken record on this for 30 years, don't become the Silicon Valley. You don't have to. You need to act on this early, as you also work on growth. So there are outliers, right? That's the lower right quadrant, by the way. Those are places that are growing at a healthy clip economically, but not becoming affordable. It is achievable. But there are other challenges too. The growing losses from extreme weather, in particular, showing up in many different ways, and the market shoes that are dropping at last to tell us that we need to change. I'm referring to property insurance for one, but it's not the only one. And as of now, we have no national strategy. We are one of the few advanced economies that does not. And the leadership is coming entirely from local and state and tribal governments. And this is a really significant challenge and an urgent one in its own right. Another challenge is the uncertainty that is affecting investment. Any investor, anyone in this profession will tell you that nothing snuffs out investment appetite like uncertainty. You just don't know how to bet. You can't even take a calculated risk, right? That's in the nature of uncertainty. Trade is at the core of that, especially over the last year, the really erratic changes in trade policy, all the unknowns around it. And that's the index that you see. But it's not the only source. People are really worried about a recession. They're really worried about their particular job and their local economy. They're worried about AI, particularly in relation to jobs. So this is another challenge. And then there's the dramatic change. I had the privilege of serving in the Obama administration, and I helped to run the Office of Management and Budget about 15 years ago. There's a long history of relationship between the federal government, states, localities, tribes, the territories as well. And over the long haul, we see something of an upswing. Those two humps, by the way, are the Great Recession and the pandemic recession, when we really did surge quite a bit of resource, in part on a bipartisan basis, by the way, in part because we learned the hard way after the Great Recession that if we didn't invest enough in the economy, we'd have a very long and protracted recession or a lot of joblessness. It was just unnecessary. It affects people very profoundly. So people came together, around the time of the pandemic and actually provided a lot of aid. But that has been tapering rapidly, spent out. And then you see the dramatic federal cutbacks of the last year, going all the way to rescissions and clawbacks of funding. And I will spare you the rest of the fiscal jargon, but all the ways the federal government is able to cancel monies and reach and cancel grants for all sorts of things that local leaders can put to work, can put to use in profoundly useful ways. So this is another biggie. It's another big challenge. I'm also in conversation with state governments about this and leaning into aspects of this basically to force innovation, to force hard conversations that are sort of overdue, to take care of unfinished business, if you will. And then finally, there's development pressure. I'll get all plannery now. We'll talk about local development, including land development and proposals for it. And I had the privilege of sitting in for a conversation amongst the mayors a couple of hours ago. We talked about the importance of being intentional and having a strategy and having a vision. I'm going to come to some of that in just a moment, and a new framework that my colleagues and I have put out. But I have to say a word about data centers. Data centers are a burdensome form of infrastructure. They are not actually economic development when you look at the innards of them and their impacts. Thinking people can disagree, and they are very vigorously, over how to approach data center development. I'm not here with a sermon on AI tonight. But I am holding up data centers because they are the latest expression of a movie cities have seen over and over and over again. And I'm talking about the pressure to develop, the sales pitch. If you want to be able to provide, local services, if you want to have a healthy tax base, don't ask too many questions. Don't put too many conditions on the way development happens, or your community could get passed by. That's frequently been a conversation, especially when those other things happen. There's a fall off in federal aid. We saw this in the 1980s in a really dramatic way. A lot of very inequitable public-private partnerships, for example, deals that were not worth it. They were not actually good for cities, but cities were pressured to say yes to them. Data centers are, as I say, a fast-moving and complex, biggest source of growth in our economy right now is the capital investment in these things. It's astonishing how large it is. So there's all these pressures. And let's get an image back here. I've named a list of them, from affordability, climate-related losses, even where people disagree, by the way, on why the weather is changing. They agree that it is. They don't like what they see. It's scary. And they don't see answers in many places. There's the fiscal pressure. And then there's the pull or the pressure in a different sense, especially for commercial and industrial development. Take the deal. This is important, and we'll figure out how to make it good for you. Historically, as we looked at ways to address these kinds of challenges and not waste a crisis, lean in with bold ideas, take us to a new place of understanding on something, whether it is the keys to housing affordability or these other things as well, good jobs. We noticed, or we rediscovered, if you will, a fundamental problem, and that is that at the local level, especially, land use policy and planning, for all its contentiousness and specialness, something that we by and large reserve as a prerogative for local governments, is only loosely connected to a bunch of the other muscles, if you will, or capabilities that governments have, including local governments, to develop the economy, to shape the economy your community deserves. I'm referring, not going to laundry list them all, but I'm referring to those other things like small business development, using procurement, investing in the workforce, believing in job quality standards. Our economy became, the American economy became for many years, a prolific creator of bad jobs. That needs to be understood very clearly. Lots of jobs, just a lot of them lousy on the level of wages, access to benefits, and more. We've begun to turn that around. And by the way, there's bipartisan interest in this, a lot of bipartisan interest in the quality of jobs. Public support, as you probably know, for the concept of a union or some form of worker voice is back at historic highs we haven't seen in over 50 years in this country. So lots of economic development, right, other than land use policy and planning, but it's an important tool. So how do we start to think about these together and really knit them and put them to work to shape just cities that are opportunity rich at a time of so much change? We are offering, and we are in conversation with a number of communities around the country about a framework for equitable economic development, and one that integrates land and forward-thinking ideas about land with a number of those other economic development tools that I mentioned. And we've designed it as a little bit of a jigsaw puzzle. It's critical that the pieces fit together. And so far, we've gotten really positive feedback on the very simple, maybe deceptively simple, ideas at the heart of each of these puzzle pieces. Let me say a very quick word about each. Let me explain them and why it's so important that they fit together. I'm going to give you a quick example, or name some exemplars, if you will, of cities across the country doing some of these things extraordinarily well that we can learn from. And then I will wrap up. First of all, which development game gets played? This is a threshold question. This is very related to a question the mayors were talking about in the conversation earlier today. What's your vision? What sort of city do you want to become? It's very different, right, from the old days. It used to be called in economic development the attraction game. You'd sort of say, we're open for business. You know, we're open to ideas. That's about the opposite of vision. That's a lack of any vision, of any sense of sort of shaping the economy you want and drawing on the specialness of your community. This issue of which game gets played and of shaping it is foundational, and that's why we put it first. Number two, the rules of the game. Land use rules are an important part of that, but there are other rules as well. We are seeing a real renaissance in how, I don't know if these words belong together, procurement renaissance. Procurement sounds like a snooze issue, but governments across the country are waking up to the fact that government is, after all, the biggest buyer of goods and services, period, in the economy. Procurement is very kludgy. It's in many communities not been looked at in many, many years, just sort of done the same old way, usually with the same suppliers. There's a kind of a procurement excellence movement. I know it doesn't sound sexy, but it's unlocking a whole lot of innovation. Once you start to rip away that cover, you realize, oh, wow, we could think about job quality standards. We could think about expanding the ownership economy in our community, really building a broader and more diverse pipeline of suppliers. This issue that the contracts go to the same folks over and over, it's a long pattern in many parts of the country. I was talking to the Housing Commission of Chicago about this a couple of years ago. I said, we put out a racial equity plan and then realized we have a totally non-diverse set of developers we work with. And that just wouldn't do, especially because we're Chicago. We clearly can do better than that. We need to work at it. We got to be intentional. So which game gets played? And I'll give you an example of a city that I think has taken this on with force. What are the rules of the game, the range of these rules, not just land use? Who gets to play? Really critical. One of the ways we had this conversation earlier in the afternoon is, in a sense, who are your development partners? Are you reaching out to, are you looking for the kinds of partners that can understand your vision, that can help you achieve equitable development? That's really, really different, right, from sort of waiting at the window. I don't want to critique Mayor Mamdani. He's been in office, 2 minutes so far? But his predecessor implemented a set of policies in New York City where development is often contentious and concerns about affordability are particularly strong. New York City was one of the first cities in the country to enact an equity impact assessment for all major land use decisions. So you can't propose a rezoning, for example, to do a big development in New York and not prepare a racial equity report. And city planning has worked very hard on this, and they've invested a lot of effort. And one of the things that we found, though, was, if you're only working at the 11th hour, right, on the proposals that come through the door and not actively shaping that pipeline, assessment alone is not enough. You're going to find that the projects are consistently wanting and sometimes are taking you backward and are not bringing your community together around justice and around opportunity and a city for all. And finally, if you'll bear with my game metaphor here, there's which game and there's the rules and there's who gets to play and who are the development partners. There's also which specific plays get investment. And we've seen a lot of innovation, and many folks in this room I know have been a part of it, around financing, around blending different types of capital. But this, too, is an area where we need to integrate this puzzle piece with the others on its own, it just doesn't deliver enough. So I'm going to race you through, I promise, just a couple of exemplars. What game do you want to play? St. Louis really gets my attention on this dimension especially. The catalyst for this 2030 jobs plan, as they entitle it, driving a decade of inclusive growth, doing transformational work. So it's not about one project or a couple transactions here and there. The catalyst was the shooting of Michael Brown, an unarmed black man over a decade ago. It led to many, many responses from the leadership and from the community, of course, from activists, some of them in criminal justice, for sure, but many in the economy and the question, how do we create an economy that works for all of our community? And St. Louis is, I think, a standout in part for deciding that it wanted to actively name the economy it is going to create and work through the how, do the pencil work, and then consistently track who's getting the contracts, who's getting the jobs, how good are they, et cetera, et cetera. So you think about how narrowly we are told to think about the health of our economy, GDP, or what's going on Wall Street. This is all about Main Street, but it's all of those measures. So they've thought deeply about it. Where do we want to go, and how will we know that we are getting there? The rules of the game. Austin deserves a lot of credit for tackling this with vigor and sticking at it. This little plan, the image I have on the screen for you, is about 8 years old now, and they've been at this a while, and they have results to show for it. So there's land use reform and building code reform and contractor reform and living wage stuff. Became the first city in the American South to pass a paid sick leave ordinance covering absolutely all workers, and then the state government preempted them and said, no, you can't. But I mean, they have come at it with everything, deserve a lot of credit for shifting the rules of the game and in a thoughtful, holistic way. And then I'm going to do what any speaker running out of time does. I'm going to cheat and invite you to look at this piece of work by my colleagues, the amazing Tracy Lowe and Lanier Richardson, who you may know, and Bethany Krupika. Not because their concept, their proposal for a community investment fund is in and of itself the be-all and end-all, but because they walk through in such, I think, an honest and an accessible way, where are we on essentially community economic development and the financing of it and the specific models that let you achieve a vision and make sure that it can pencil out. And that includes things like using federal tax credits that still exist, but using them in a deeply intentional, pro-justice, pro-inclusion way. There's a lot in here, and it complements the other pieces of the puzzle that I've tried to lay out for you. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Xav, so much. We are now going to bring in Mayor Pureval. We thought it was important to also hear from a mayor who's on the front lines doing this work. Hi, Mayor Pureval. We're going to put you up on the Jumbotron and look forward to hearing your remarks before we go into some Q&A from Anthony and the audience.
Thank you all so much for accommodating me. I'm so sorry I couldn't be there with you this evening, but I'm so thrilled to be here virtually. Thank you to all the partners for bringing this together, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, of course, Harvard, and thank you to my fellow panelists. You know, I was really struck by the presentation that we all just heard. And really with the opening line, don't let a crisis or an emergency go to waste. And mayors know that more than maybe anyone. There's always a daily crisis, a daily fire drill that you're dealing with. And oftentimes those daily issues can knock you off of your broader vision, knock you off of the big things that you're trying to accomplish. And so, you know, what I really want to reiterate, particularly to build off of the previous presentation, is really just that. There's going to be a lot of different things coming your way for the new mayors, for the older mayors or more experienced, excuse me. You probably know that inherently. But when I came into office, crisis was really kind of the word of the day. 4 council members had been indicted for public corruption. Of course, it was 2021, so we were just kind of coming out of the pandemic, but Omicron was still raging. Our capital side of our budget was $400 million with deferred capital maintenance. And of course, climate change was continuing and is continuing to be a challenge. And so with 9 new council members who had never been in City Hall before, and me as well, who had never worked in municipal government, it was a crisis, is to say the least. And I start there because that really focused all of us on what are the things that we are trying to accomplish, what are the opportunities that this crisis has presented, and how can we make decisions now that aren't really just focused on the next 2 years or 4 years of reelection, but decisions that will reverberate through generations moving forward. And one of the first things we did was took a look at systems. When we looked at our city, we realized that our city was dealing with a housing crisis. Cincinnati has been named the most expensive city as it relates to percentage of rent increases year over year by Redfin. That is not a list that I want to be on as mayor. And when we really studied this, of course, gap financing was a problem. Of course, there were other challenges that we were dealing with as a Midwestern city. But one of the main things that was holding us back was an antiquated zoning code. We hadn't touched our zoning code in 50 years. And in those 50 years, our city had turned into a city that was very, very segregated and a city with high concentrations of poverty. And unfortunately, that was the case because by and large, it was designed to be that way. And so we did a very difficult thing, which was to rezone our city, completely and comprehensively reform it. But when the presentation was talking about having that vision for what you want your city to look like, we really had to do the hard work and say, okay, what's important to us? And we decided collectively as a city that dense, walkable, diverse communities with good public transportation and good access to world-class art, those were the things that were important to us. And so we reformed our zoning code along our 24/7 transit lines and along our potentially new bus rapid transit lines, and also in our neighborhood business districts. And we legalized row homes and townhomes in SF2, which is our smallest parcel zoning designation all across the city, essentially unlocking our potential and legalizing housing typologies where they had been prohibited. It was a very hard thing to do. Zoning codes are like the third rail of local politics. You hear a lot of racism. You hear a lot of just untruths and misconceptions about renters. And for the most part, people are just afraid. They're afraid of the unknown and they're afraid of change. That's particularly true here in Cincinnati. But because we were able to push that through and had the courage of our convictions, Cincinnati became the first city in the state of Ohio to rezone. Columbus followed on there shortly, and Cleveland is working on it now. Now, don't get me wrong, rezoning is not going to unlock overnight affordable housing into your communities, but it is a critical component of that. Of course, you need the gap financing. Of course, you need good relationships with your state government so you can get those LIHTC awards. Of course, building codes plays a part, but it's important to also include zoning code changes when you're thinking about, when you have your urban planning design hat on and you're thinking about the future. We also had the $400 million deficit on the capital side, and we sold our railroad. We owned a interstate railroad between Cincinnati and Chattanooga, Tennessee, and sold it for $1.6 billion that now creates an evergreen infrastructure fund where we use the interest off of the principal for $60 million a year. So we haven't solved that $400 million deficit, but we are slowly working our way forward. And then, finally, I worked with our business community, with our Fortune 500s, and said, look, folks, we've got this post-economy pandemic. We've got this housing crisis. We continue to be challenged by climate change. We are in the quote unquote Rust Belt, which is a moniker that we despise. But manufacturing is gone. What's the next economy for our city? What should we be focused on? So we opened up all of our budgets. We gave it to our corporate community, And they drafted a report called the Futures Commission that gives us a step-by-step guide as to what they would do if they were in city government. I was reelected this past November, and in my inaugural address just a week ago, I did probably the most unpopular thing I've ever done. And I'm a mayor who tends to piss off his city a lot. I think I'm the most popular, unpopular mayor in the country. But in my inaugural address, I announced that we needed to raise our earnings tax, specifically to fund affordable housing development, support minority businesses, and continue to take aggressive action on poverty. And we also needed to fund development in our communities. And so it's my attempt to change, again, systems, specifically economic development systems. If this earnings tax increase goes through, we will now have a pot of money, not to fund projects for economic development, specifically mixed use, but to say Bond Hill, Roselawn, Price Hill, communities that have not been invested in, communities that have not shared the growth that we're seeing in Cincinnati. We are going to allocate $6.5 million for general economic development in your city or in your neighborhood, because we think it's important that in order to attract private investment, we have to make a market. The city, the public have to be the first movers. And for too long, we have sat by passively and waited for developers to come to us. I'm hoping that that fundamental change in our processes and in our systems, whether it be infrastructure, zoning, or economic development systems, I really hope that they live on past my 4 or 8 years, and that the crises that we inherited, we did not waste, but the decisions we made had a huge impact moving forward. Thanks, guys. I can see you clapping. I cannot hear you clapping. So I'm going to assume
there
you're all
was
chanting.
thunderous clapping. Thunderous clapping. I'm going to put the mic out. One more clap for me.
Is it possible to take me off the massive screen?
Did you get a little of that? Okay,
yeah,
great.
I did. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all very much. Lots of really rich information, so much so I'm going to pivot my role as moderator of conversation to facilitator of questions, because I'm sure there are a number of questions for the audience. Anthony's had a burning question all day that is really kind of getting at the crisis. What do we do in a crisis? Anthony's book, 20 Conversations with Mayors, was at that first hump you showed us. And Mayor Pureval and all of our mayors here are at this second hump. So I do want to have this conversation around how not to waste a crisis, that I hope some of the response is going to tie to your remark about forcing innovation. And I want to see what that looks like and maybe what the arc is different. I want to come back to your framework around the plan, the rules, and who gets the play in investment, and tie that back to the third rail of land use regulation. But I also really want to make sure that the audience gets a few questions in before we wrap in the next 10 under 15 minutes. Anthony, why don't you start the dialogue off for us? Thank you. I think you speak.
It's already on. Is it? All right. Thank you so much. It's a great privilege to be here. Greetings from the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. We're a global think tank just across Cambridge Common, and have enjoyed a great many partnerships and collaboration with the GSD. And it was heartwarming to see so many references to land and land use and land policy in Zav's presentation. Indeed, we've been interviewing mayors because we recognize that local government and mayors, that's where the action is. And for our series Mayor's Desk, as Toni referenced, started interviewing mayors from all around the world in about 2018, and the context ended up being the pandemic and the murder of George Floyd. And it made me think, and I want to pose this question to Mayor Aftab. I get to call him that because he said I could. That now, how in the world does a municipal leader who's sort of modeled in this urban mechanic, approach, just roll up their sleeves. These interviews, these leaders I interviewed, are really genuine and earnest problem solvers. And I really came to respect that. But in today's environment, Mayor Aftab, can you just sort of personally, do a little personal reflection on how in the world do you operate in this climate of lawsuits and preemption? So it's not only do cities and towns want to see if they can make progress on housing and climate, they're getting this opposition, the lawsuits, the preemption, and cities, I think, are challenged to make any progress at all in that kind of, it's just such a bare-knuckled climate. So how do you get through the day, Mayor Aftab?
Great question. There's a lot of different ways I could answer that question, but obviously it's hard, it's scary. With what's happening in Minneapolis, with what's happened in Chicago and LA, you feel this profound pressure not to make the wrong step or say the wrong thing for fear of political retribution that, primarily will impact your vulnerable communities. It's a weight. Because you work so hard to get into these roles, and once you're in the role, you work so hard to just improve your community, and you want to, demonstrate your values, your ethics, and your morals through your leadership, but you also try to temper that with not making it worse for the vulnerable members of your community. But it also reminds you how important and critical leadership is, always, but now. And I try to remind myself that in this moment, it is incredibly important for mayors to be really, really effing good at their jobs. And this moment really demands that kind of moral and clear leadership, if nothing else, to be a comp to the kind of transactional and selfish leadership that we're seeing at the federal level. I don't want to overstate this, but mayors it's a true test of leadership. You're the moral voice of your city. And people look to you to be that kind of leader, to step into the void, to not spin or obfuscate, but to lead. And it's a real privilege to have that opportunity, particularly right now.
Do you feel, just quick follow-up, is there any instance that you can point to where you feel like you've tried to move ahead with your own initiatives and policies, and you've gotten actively just this incredible opposition or derailing in a frustrating way where you haven't been able to move ahead as you'd like? Because it's not only whatever ideas you might have about housing or climate resilience, you're getting this opposition that's trying to push you off track, it seems to me.
Yeah. I mean, at every corner. This is probably further afield from the subject of this panel, but it happens in every context. But where it happens the most and where it happens that makes me the angriest is in gun violence, the preemption to prevent cities from passing their own sensible gun reforms, the flooding of our communities by guns. Ohio doesn't really have a ghost gun problem because it's so easy to just get a gun. the gun deaths that are affecting children because of the universal accessibility of guns, and then for federal and state leaders to have the gall to blame mayors as if we don't care that the kids in our city are dying. That strikes me as the worst example of what you're talking about.
Yeah. I want to invite first our students. If you have a question, think of it, because I'm going to pivot to you and try to take a few questions from the audience while you're thinking about your question. I want to kind of segue issues of gun violence to economic opportunity and just follow up a question for Xav in talking about inclusive growth that the mayor also referenced as making a market, and tie that back to your framework. And I'm very interested in the 10 out of 200 that are managing to grow while remaining affordable. Thank you very much. I was trying to say anti-displacement without trying to say anti-displacement because I don't like the term anti-displacement. It forwards the harmful language that we're trying to rid ourselves of. But I wonder if you could just speak a little bit to, well, what's the profile of cities that can actually begin to increase their housing supply ahead of that growth in order to create that affordable platform? Can you talk a little bit about, well, what's the profile of type of city that's in a position to do that type of work? And in this moment where cities feel like they don't have a lot of resources or things like that, is starting with the plan and the vision first, in order to get the capital in place? Just walk us through how we do that, maybe using your framework.
Well, Toni, I think I can answer that briefly in two ways. Places that are working on this proactively have some growth. Mm-hmm. In other words, their profile includes the fact that they are welcoming people not experiencing what we've seen in many cities over many decades, and that is depopulation. It's a whole other challenge to manage. Some of the places growing now went through that, so they're on an upswing. And, it makes the need for more visible, but it requires real leadership. I mean, not to, again, pick on any region. They're all struggling with very specific challenges, but I'm sorry, the world's wealthiest technology clusters in Northern California, and that place worked itself into a hole over 25 years, 30 years, not overnight. It got to be so bad, through inattention and a failure to face up to the challenges. And I've said that to big tech, and I've said that to the philanthropies there, and we began to see some change, but just not enough. So growth is a part of the profile. Those 10 include cities that are wide-ranging: Indianapolis, Pensacola, mid-sized cities in Colorado, even San Jose. Expensive already, but they have made progress. Austin has brought rents down. Yeah. They've worked so successfully at this. The other profile, the other feature, if you will, or trait, is civic capacity. You have to build it.
Really good point.
You don't get the results otherwise simply by having, the country's most technically excellent and innovative land use code. Yeah. Or a bunch of capable developers, though those things certainly help.
Yeah. I was hoping that's what you would say, because I think this is a moment where, our scholarship, our students should be really paying attention to the Detroits, the St. Louis's, the Indianapolis's, the Columbuses, the mayors that are in this room, as places where these deep problems but opportunities of addressing affordability really have a chance, different from the DCs, the San Franciscos, and the New Yorks, right? I think this is where we as a community of scholars and practitioners and students can lend our innovation in design and planning to forge ways that we can start to build the gap in that. So I think that's great to end on. I do want to see if there are just maybe a couple of questions in the audience before we wrap up. And again, I will prioritize students first if I see your hand, but then also take questions from anyone who has it. Don't let me down, students. I know you got questions. Where? There's a little hand somewhere. Okay, right here. And Maddie's going to hold the mic while you ask a brief question. Maddie, hold the mic,
All right.
which means you can let go of the mic. Absolutely.
I'll try my best. Hi, Omer, not a student, unfortunately. So, a question for the mayor. Your city and all cities are influenced by big forces that you can't really kind of control, but you can influence. So my question is, to what extent you're kind of strategically trying to influence these forces, be it the kind of state government, federal government, maybe a big employer with an HQ outside your kind of city. So to what extent you're trying to influence these forces, and to what extent you're finding yourself adopting their frameworks of viewing the world that is different to yours. Are they interested in a particular matrix that you don't really care about, but they do? So you're kind of, let's try to do something to maximize that. So that's my question.
So hold that question. How are you influencing and how are you withstanding the influence? And let's see if there's another question I'll try to get to. And yes, right here, and then I'll see if I can get up to the top.
So something I'm really interested in, and I think kind of came up a bunch, is sort of, I guess, for lack of a better term, the Rust Belt, and sort of these previously declining cities that are now sort of building upon the loss of, or the overbuilt infrastructure that they have. I guess I'm kind of curious about how you can take lessons from those cities and apply it to places like Boston that are not overbuilt.
Great. So that's great. One from you. And so let's take... let's get that last question up there, and then we will round out our evening. Yes, sir. Your question.
You're not addressing the earlier question?
I'm going to take 3 questions, and then they're going to answer all 3.
Okay,
so
get that.
Let's hear yours.
So years ago, states began enacting environmental impact statements as a hurdle to a development, and developers and proponents had to file those. It took a lot of work. I'm just curious whether anyone has a feel for what the burden and reaction will be among the development community to an equity impact statement, and whether that can only be done in a city that has innate heavy demand. There's a lot of demand to be there. If you're in a city in a weak position and you impose an equity impact statement, do you drive what little interest there is in your city away? And they say, to hell with it, I'm going somewhere else.
Great, thank you. So we've got your influence over the influence of large investment. We've got lessons from legacy cities, and we've got the equity impacts. Mayor Pureval, you want to start with the first or any other of those questions?
Yeah, absolutely. They're all fantastic questions. So I'll try and be brief so everyone can touch on them. I doubt this is what you're asking me, sir, the first question. But what immediately jumped into so the answer is yes. I try to influence, larger macroeconomic forces, but I also kind of have to work within the matrix. And so, what my mind directly went to was capitalism. I am a capitalist. Let me just make that very clear at the top. But I feel like a lot of my job and my bandwidth is thinking about generational poverty and the resulting generational gun violence, and trying to change that for future generations. And, necessarily there are winners and losers in our capitalistic system, but it just tends to be the same communities of people. At least that's true in Cincinnati. And so, I try to leverage kind of free market strategies in order to combat the disproportionate effects of capitalism on minority communities. Things like baby bonds, things like, eliminating medical debt through buying the debt pennies on the dollar, trying to think about leveraging free market capitalistic ideas in order to work within this system rather than trying to break down the capitalism or I don't know, reform it in some way. And the best example of that is housing, to unlock your market, to legalize the housing and to build more housing at every single income level in order to stabilize prices is critically important. I reject the Rust Belt. I'm sorry for introducing that into the vernacular. I completely take responsibility for that. I think what you can learn from Midwestern cities that are kind of changing is just that risk tolerance, right? The idea that you can try different things, learn from them, and then move forward. I've worked in both private sector and public sector. In private sector, the risk tolerance is really high. In public sector, the risk tolerance is very low. Everyone is terrified of failing. And so trying to change that culture in city halls is of very big importance to me. In a city like Cincinnati, an equitable statement, I don't think there'd be an issue with requiring that. But enforcing it would be very difficult. The deals that we have, given the interest rates, construction costs, are very difficult to pencil. And so if you add another layer, it would make that more difficult. That's why we've rezoned, in order to take away some of those bureaucratic obstacles.
Great certainty. Anthony, do you want to take up any of those questions before I give the last words to Xav?
On that last question about any sort of burdens on development, and just addressing the abundance movement, which we've heard so much about, which is kind of tied into some of the zoning reform that you talked about. I do think there is a place for that, and watching zoning reform and any streamlining of permitting or code reform, or even small things like single stair, allowing single stair access in 6 to 12 unit apartment buildings. It's fine-grained stuff, but I think it's really remarkable. Across the country, there's some 33 states that have passed some sort of zoning reform, and so I think that is a positive direction.
To the question about scaring away development, I think this is an important question, really about, is equity and screens for equity sort of in tension with healthy growth? To be clear, there are only a couple of jurisdictions across the country that have any such requirement attached to land use. A number of others have experimented with things like running their agency programs, human service programs, workforce investment, even municipal budgeting, by the way. City of Dallas has been running equity screens on their annual budgeting for years and years, very unsung. I would say, while it's a totally fair question, it's such a nascent practice. Our bigger concern at the moment ought to be the age-old one, and that is bad development, or development on bad terms. So where there is pressure to develop, and data centers are the biggest expression of that right now, making sure that there's a healthy conversation about the public interests, about the range of interests, about the longer run, not just the short, and that we not ask communities to be sacrificial lambs for a bum deal, frankly. Cities and states as well have always screened on some level for development. The interesting question is how. So I'm not arguing the question, but that to me is what's sort of fundamental. On this issue of kind of cities as navigating the seas, if you will, versus being able to shape the currents. It's a fact that our system of government sets up relationships between the federal and state and local levels that are, how shall I put it, feisty, have always been, in many ways are that way by design. And yet, it is not only the case that we generate many of our most important innovations locally to then take them to scale or take them nationwide, whether it is high school, which originated in a local community in the Midwest and then went across the country, universal secondary education, which is an American invention, by the way. It's born in local America. And many, many other things that we can name, right? The forerunners for the Affordable Care Act, begun here in Massachusetts, and many other things. So it's not just innovation that springs from the bottom up. It is also the case that cities, as feisty as those relationships can be, can often engage with state government around the incredible importance of cities for rural communities as well, and get past this awful binary, which has been a deep division in America. There's an excellent book out, by the way, on the rural-urban divide by a political scientist named Suzanne Mettler. And she looks at the root of this and how it has intensified over the last 30 years, in particular, how partisanship is bound up with it. And you see these just awful stereotypes that have built up, and people, if they are, let's say, lawmakers in state house from rural communities, that enter into office with a set of terrible misconceptions about cities in their state, and have never been offered a way, from anyone they trust anyway, to think about cities as assets. I have to name the American South when I say this, though this is not unique to the South, but there's just such a long, powerful history of state government acting as anything but a partner, especially with Black-led cities. But it is not to say cities cannot make, the argument the other way, pointing out the tremendous economic engines that they represent and the other functions that they perform too that benefit rural communities. Longer conversation, of course.
Right. And unfortunately, we're going to have to end it with that. But students, head to cities. For sure. Let us thank our panelists this evening for their great remarks. Thank you all for welcoming our new cohort. Have a good evening. Thank you.